So I must have listened to this interview at least 5 times. I had never heard of the indigenous climate activist Julian Aguan, who's also a writer and an attorney, and who has spending his life trying to save the islands of the South Pacific that are so vulnerable to climate change, where the sea levels are rising 2 to 3 times faster than the global average. And in this interview, he talked about the moment he decided to be an advocate. It was 2005, and the United States had just announced a hyper-intensification of the militarization of Guam. And this was not a decision that he or any of his fellow Guamians had any say in, but they were just up against the largest institutional producer of greenhouse gases in the world, which is the United States military. And so he decided, I have got to go to law school, even though he, in his words, believed that the law was a creation and an institution of colonialization that used language and knowledge to keep some in and some out. He still felt like, I got to learn the law so I can get in here to protect people. So he went to law school, then he started his own law firm there's a nonprofit called Blue Ocean, and then with a team of attorneys and a lot of students from the University of South Pacific Law School, they filed this kind of groundbreaking case in the International Court of Justice to try to protect these islands. And it took 5 years for the International Court of Justice to rule, but they ruled in July of 2025. It was in the news for a few days, kind of NPR and that kind of thing, this historic case ruling that countries and corporations that damage these smaller countries have a responsibility to repair. Now, the truth is the United States does not consider that binding, doesn't care, snubs their nose, but it was still like a huge shot in the arm for all the people advocating for climate, right? For the scientists and students and activists to just step up and go, here, and it has brought a lot of power and energy to the movement. Advocate. It's a really interesting, powerful word. In John's gospel, the Greek is paraclete. And that word only shows up in John's gospel and in letter of John, but it can be translated counselor or comforter. But here is this advocate. It's Jesus saying, I'm standing with you. I'm leaving, but I'm not leaving in fact, I'm more present. It's no longer like you're just by Jesus if he's right here. It's like there is this spirit, this energy, this creation, this passion that we feel, right? Whenever we're with a group of people, whenever we're touching a lover, this kind of passion that we can feel that's just unleashed into the world. Advocate. I've been thinking about how important is that right now, right? We have the local group, AIR, that works with immigrants, trying to protect people. It stands for Advocates for Immigration Rights and Reconciliation. A lot of you have been trained as rapid response people if ICE shows up to show up, right? Or I think of the Patient Ally Program with Planned Parenthood, where advocates show up, where guest patients are coming, right? They may be coming for a mammogram, they may be coming for birth control, they may be coming for an abortion, but there are people hollering and heckling and screaming, and the advocates walk with the people, often with a big giant umbrella to protect them from all of that. It's and if you've ever found yourself really in desperate need at a low point, you know what it means to have an advocate. Judy Bordeaux was one of the people who spoke last week and spoke about, kind of the founding days of this church. And all of you have heard me say so many times what it meant to me at a really rough point in my life that people stood with me. They advocated. Honest to God, I wouldn't have made it through without that, right? So to have someone advocating. But that was not the reason I listened to this interview 5 times. I listened to this interview, maybe it was 6 or 7, because of what he said next. He was asked about being an attorney and a writer together, these two things. And how did he hold all that together? And he said, talking about his writing, that there is one thing that can save us from climate catastrophe, and that is intimacy. And that's not what I expected to hear. And then he went on to talk about stories, and he talked about how we have to smuggle into the climate conversation what has been so deeply missing, and that is intimacy. And he was talking about the deep love and passion and connection that makes us rise up and care for one another. Because he was saying it's not enough to just inform people look how New Orleans is going to be gone in like 30 or 40 years. I mean, you have to move people, right? You have to find a way to touch people, help them connect. I thought about when I had a baby. No one can prepare you for that, right? Like the exhaustion, all of it. But no one prepares you either for how your heart comes out of your chest when they put the baby on your chest, right? Just the way your heart just comes out of your chest and how it just keeps coming out, when they start to walk, when they graduate, and how it comes out of your chest, especially when they're hurting or in danger or disappointed, right? I mean, we've all felt that, like just reaching out in this deep kind of love. And I heard it last week when Judy and Ben and Allison, all three spoke. It was like, well, what has being a part of a new church meant to you? And all three of them spoke about something intimate and vulnerable too, like a divorce or a challenge in a relationship, or just growing up in a church and the vulnerability. And that was like when they spoke in that way, everybody kind of leaned forward, was drawn in, right? That kind of intimacy that draws us together. And we all know what happens when that intimacy is breached or ruptured. I remember seeing this story not long ago, and I can't even, I'll talk about just about anything, but I was like, I can't even say it. It was a CNN story about, I'm just going to say, sexual assault academies. There were these websites that teach people how to assault people, not perfect strangers, but members of their family. You may have seen it about their spouses and partners and how you can drug people and film it. And you're like 62 million views in February on this website, which was named Motherless. And I just thought that was the most interesting name for such a website. I thought, did the person who came up with this and conceived of this, was that an experience that they don't feel like? Or was it like mothers not watching? Or do people who go to that website feel like this lack of connection? I don't know. But we know somehow there's got to be a way where we reconnect with our love for one another. And that's another interesting thing about this passage here, that the word abide shows up 40 times in these 3 or 4 chapters. Abiding love. Jesus says over and over and over again, I'm going away, but I'm not leaving you. I'm in the Father, and the Father's in me. I abide with you. It's not this kind of love where, oh, I like what you sang, so you're my friend. It's like, I am digging in with you forever, right? This way that we abide with one another through thick and thin, right? Poverty and plenty, health and sickness. We are dug in with one another for whatever. It says, I am going to abide with you and love you deeply. And so he tells these stories of intimacy, like the little village of Vunidogolo, which was the first village in Fiji to relocate voluntarily in 2014. Fiji, like a few years ago, had a list of 42 villages that are going to be underwater, and they have to make plans to relocate. And he talked about the trauma of that relocation, especially for the elders. In that village, the native language, the word for people, vanua, is the same word for land. The people are so tethered to the land. They don't own the land as individuals. It's communally held, and there's just this deep connection. And so the village elder described the process as they prepared to relocate. They had these fasting circles, and they prayed, and they began to kind of wailing, a lot of wailing. And then the day when it came to leave, there were 30 families, and they began to walk, and the women wailed and wailed. They said it was the sound of the sea, these women just wailing. And part of what was so painful was they couldn't take everyone. They couldn't take their ancestors. They couldn't take their bones. And so the next day, this old man got up and walked all the way back to the village to see his wife there, to apologize that he couldn't take her. And the next day, the same thing, and the next day, and the next day. And Julian described this and imagined what flowers would this old man have been carrying for his wife, right? If I can't help you see the love and passion this man had for his wife, how can you care about this village of Unidolago that had to get up and move, right? So it's all these images of love and passion and connection. But it's not just this advocacy and this intimacy. There's like this place where they meet, and what comes out of this is this resilience and ingenuity and hope, and people fighting back. This Julian Aguan wrote this phenomenal essay in Atlantic in 2021 that was a runner-up for a Pulitzer Prize, and it's called To Hell with Drowning, and that's their motto. We aren't drowning, we are fighting back. And he tells this incredible story about these women in the Cataract Islands off of Papua New Guinea. They're matrilineal societies, and 20 years ago, they got fed up with the government for doing nothing, right? So they started their own organization called Tulela Pesa, which in the native language means sailing the waves on our own. And they began to formulate their own relocation plans, like 18-point plans, and they began to think, and they had like counseling, and they had land management, and they had resource development, and they came together to try to think, what can we do? And they began to try to find ways to secure arable land, and they planted cassava and taro and cocoa beans. They planted 30,000 cocoa bean trees and started this cocoa bean refinery. And then he said the most amazing thing was kind of represented by what the people in this tiny island of Lamatrek did. They decided that they would sail a traditional boat, a canoe, to Guam for this Pacific Festival of the Arts. And what was so significant was they sailed by like Wayfinder, by these navigation, ancient way of like looking into the heavens. But they also sailed with this traditional sail made only of panduma sleeves. And there was only one woman left in the village who knew how to make this sail. She was 90-year-old Maria Labusholam, and she was dying. And in the last 2 weeks of her life, she gathered 15 women together, and she taught them how to harvest these leaves and how to dry them and split them and then how to weave them together into this beautiful sail. And then after her death, they completed the sail, and the village sailed it there. And he keeps talking about that spirit, like what a miracle, what her own farewell discourse was, right? Rather than to say, we're going to lay down and die, it's like this spirit of ingenuity and power is right here with us. And he closed with these beautiful words. The women of Lamatrek are emblematic of the predicament of all the oceanic people. They're coming from these traditions with just richness, just incredible resilience, incredible beauty. But today, that is no longer enough to save us. For thousands of years, they've been able to adapt and move and change, but not anymore. And what he said was this: the part simply cannot save the whole. The answer to climate change must come from everyone, or it will come from no one. Maria performed something of a miracle in the last days of her life. With just pandama sleeves and love, she managed to create this beautiful sail. And then she opened a window to a world, a future in which good people refuse to simply lay down and die. A future which opens us up to a rich possibility, a future in which there is room for us all. Maria and Julian, and of course Jesus, and mothers and mentors, and so many through the years have gone before us, and filling us with their spirit, passing on their love and care and grace. May we find the courage to walk through that window. Amen.